Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for attending our session, Secure and Compliant Communications and Collaboration in Healthcare. I'm super excited today to introduce a really star-studded panel of experts that, I think will spark insights as well as some thought-provoking ideas that we can all take back as we strive to improve the quality of healthcare for all of our patients and the ease at which our HCPs communicate with them. The first member of the panel I'd like to introduce is Robin Roberts. Robin is the co-founder and chief operating officer, head of strategy for Novartis Biome. This is the first ever innovation lab that Novartis started, and Robin is also a recognized leader. MM&M's Top 40 Healthcare Transformer 2019, 20 plus years of experience in the pharmaceutical industry across enterprise value chain, and is a member of the Novartis Biome leadership team. He does hold a unique experience in successfully building and launching transformative organizations. And I just would like to say thank you, Robin, for joining the chat.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. The next panelist is Sam Shah. Sam is Chief Medical Strategy Officer for Newman. He works with numerous accelerators and digital health companies. Sam was previously Director of Digital Development for the National Health Services England, as well as the NHSX. Amongst numerous important initiatives that Sam worked on was the flagship project to digitize urgent care for NHS. Really impressive. I can't wait to hear what Sam has to say about his past work as well as interesting project he's doing with Newman. So Sam, thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. Very much looking forward to our discussion today.
Of course, thank you. And finally, Franz Obermeyer. As head of European team at NetSphere, a US headquartered secure messaging and collaboration solutions provider, he is on a mission with his company to help eliminate the so-called WhatsApp dilemma, which we will, of course, ask him exactly what that is. And doing that by secure communications and collaboration to enterprise and organizations. And specifically, we're going to talk to him about his work in the healthcare segment. So again, thank you very much, Sam, Robin, and finally Franz, for joining the discussion.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on the panel today, Bob, Robin, and Sam, and looking forward to a fruitful and good conversation.
Okay, so speaking of fruitful, Franz, I have to ask you, how important today is this role of communications and interoperability in digital transformation?
Yeah, that's a good question. So it's very important because when we look at digital transformation, which is integration of digital technology in all aspects of interaction within an organization, between organizations, with customers, with patients, specifically in healthcare, and with partners, and also with the authorities. That means a lot of communication is needed, a lot of interaction, interoperability, collaboration, not just between people, meaning human to human, but also applications with humans and vice versa. So information and communication, which means collaboration, is key, or one of the key success factors to make the digital transformation successful.
Do you feel that there is, as stated in an article out of Forbes, a necessary trade-off between this interoperability and security concerns when we're trying to innovate around this healthcare communications?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, interoperability always means you have to have some APIs, and the thing is always how you design those APIs, if you make them secure or not. The more open you build a system, the more you can interoperate, of course, but then you have a lot of potential fraud or or open doors for cyber attacks, and that's what we all don't want. That's why security was, is, and will be always very, very important, also in that digital transformation, because securing and making sure that the patient data specifically is not going into the wrong hands is very, very important.
Sam, save us from this conundrum. What is your view in terms of the state of the industry and this trade-off? Are we at a point where innovation has taken us to a place that we can definitely maximize that customer experience and at the same time provide a secure platform?
I really wish that we'd got to that point. But I think, France raises a really important, point earlier about collaboration. The whole purpose of the interoperability agenda is around collaboration, reducing friction, improving the experience. And of course, lots of innovators, healthcare providers have tried their best to do this. But in doing so, they've made some difficult decisions, or sometimes they don't even know they've made a difficult decision in breaking what I think of as the triad of security, safety, and privacy. And sometimes to achieve the outcome of reduced friction in the short term, they've ended up trading off by giving away security and privacy. But then here comes the problem. If we want patients to trust their clinicians, we want patients to have trust in systems and follow through with advice and participate, then we need trusted systems. And unfortunately, over time, the speed at which we've done things in lots of systems around the world means that we have given up on the triad of security, safety, and privacy in favor of trying to get a short-term win of integration. So I think we're a long way away from actually getting this right. But I do think to get that patient benefit, to get that beneficial outcome, we have to put something in place that makes interoperability and integration as important as security, safety, and privacy.
I love the triad. I'm gonna steal that. I will, of course, footnote to you. Rob, are you also seeing this pressure to balance the customer experience, which I know you and the Biome are innovating around, working hard to ensure that it's seamless, enjoyable at times as much as we can, but also reaches that goal of improving patients' lives and the quality of care?
Yeah, I think, look, customer experience has always been critical, right? It's always been something that that we've known at the Biome, but I think in the tech world, it's been table stakes for decades now. And nothing's changed on that end. But what has changed is that security is now a paramount piece that needs to be added. And I would agree with Sam that we're not necessarily there yet, but what has started to change is that the idea of how security will be implemented, the importance of it, is now something that is expected to be thought about and instituted at the very beginning of the project, the very beginning of the inception of that product, all the way through to the end. It's no longer acceptable to just simply retrofit, right? And think about it towards the end of the life cycle or at the end of the development of that product and say, okay, yeah, we do have, XYZ security that we're bolting on from this other possible solution. Patients, HCPs and others expect it now to be a built-in, baked-in part of any solution that we bring to them, whether it's a solution that is off the shelf or one that we're helping to develop in partnership with another organization.
Great. Yeah, I love the fact that this team is realistic but hopeful at the same time, and I think
Absolutely.
that's one of the shining lights that could come out of this pandemic. So, Franz,
Yes.
are the tools today ready in terms of clinical services? Are they ready for this need to transform and still retain the ultimate security and privacy?
Yes and no. I mean, it always depends. As we just heard, there is some tools that that drive this, let's say, customer journey and customer experience thought, which is very important because we are all, in a way, customers, right? Patients. The other day, and nothing is worse than going into a hospital and having to fill out your data 10 times in a row, same day. So it's very important to have that at max. At the same time, protecting the data is very, very important. So as long as it stays in the same hospital, it's probably not a problem. But then once it goes outside and has to be exchanged with other players in the healthcare segment, then it's important to choose the right tools and the right applications, because there is players out there, there's companies out there who say all we've done is since the beginning is to build on that, what you said, the security piece, which is most important, and the compliance piece. So security, compliance, and control for, let's say here, the hospital in this case, over the data is very, very important. And if you have a vendor like that, then you're in good shape. But if you have a vendor that comes from a totally other angle, maybe consumer angle, and says, okay, let's do healthcare now because there's a lot of money, that is dangerous, because that is just a, let's say, marketing security, which is put on there, and that's not enough.
Sam, I'm sure you have thoughts about COVID-19. We don't want to focus too much, but something interesting can be attributed to you, I think, and that is this question that we discussed. Has COVID opened a floodgate? And if so, can those floodgates ever be closed? And as a matter of fact, the other part of this question would be, do we want them to be closed?
Let's think of COVID as an accelerant. And like any accelerant, it's done something very rapid, but at the same time, what has come alongside that is decisions we may not have otherwise made. And I think the accelerant of COVID has most definitely opened the floodgates. We look at digital penetration in any of our jurisdictions around the world, it was quite variable. But what happened in COVID is those groups, those individuals that may not have used technology, suddenly started using technology to access healthcare. So you could say it actually caused the reduction in friction by necessity. But in doing so, we ended up with lots of new players playing in playing in health tech that might have come from other sectors, from retail, from finance, from other areas where they hadn't been familiar with healthcare regulation, the necessity around why security is actually a clinical safety issue in healthcare. And in doing that, we've ended up with products that are in use that we probably wouldn't have designed for had it not been for this accelerant. So have the floodgates open irreversibly? Probably. But I think we still have an opportunity to take that standards-based approach and try and bring that into everything we do. Now, it'll probably take some time to fix it. There'll probably be some health tech providers that are casualties in fixing it, but we have to fix it because we've stored up a set of security and safety issues that we've almost turned a blind eye to. We said, okay, COVID and that accelerant is more important than solving those problems. But now we're kind of living with COVID, managing it. It's become part of our lives. Actually, we need to think of it like the rest of healthcare and get back to a place where we take this seriously. And you know, I couldn't agree more with both Franz and Robin, because you know, we have seen people come from other sectors operating during this time out of necessity, and they may not have understood why, even in this time of urgency, that security and safety piece was just as important as rolling the tech out.
Fascinating. Robin, from your perspective and from your work at a life science company, particularly Novartis, what would you say, in addition to the privacy issue, are the most common unmet needs coming to your group for needs in terms of innovative solutions, especially around this communication and coordination, balancing that with security?
When I think about it, it really spans across the board, right? But if I have to choose one where I see the most activity, I would say it's the communication between the HCP and the patient, right? There's now an expectation by the patient, rightfully or not, given the environment that we're in, that there will be an opportunity or the ability to have real-time virtual communication, real-time virtual care, real-time virtual endpoint collection. So we're working very much on the technologies, the solutions that allow us to deliver on those pieces, right? Whether it is as a whole, whether it's as a platform where those pieces actually sit on, whether it's individual pieces of technology that help us kind of build this out to give that capability and create that capability. Really depends on the problem that we're trying to solve inside of the organization, for our patients or for our healthcare providers.
Thanks. Sam, I have a specific question based on your past experience and still working with the NHS. How is NHS and its organization under it? How are they currently dealing with this question of data control, specific to third-party messaging applications that may be coming in the door?
Well, I think this problem around control and processing applies equally to third-party messaging applications as it even does to other applications. And whether it's the innovators working with the biomes that Robin mentioned, and some of those that are trying to work with the system, or whether it happens to be clinicians using these apps, the challenge is that CIOs and CCIOs of healthcare organizations are often blind to the use of these. So if I take the NHS, we might have something like 1.3 million workers, and many of them will be using applications such as WhatsApp or other things like that. And they'll be using them, but they may not be under the control of the hospital, of the CIO. So on the one side, there are standards being developed, like by the NHS, of what sort of applications should be used. On the other side, there's a reality. In the state-run system, there isn't enough funding to pay for these things. So even though there is a framework and there's some standards, those hospitals can't afford to pay for these things. But there's a clinical need. There's a need amongst clinicians, whether it's an urgent need or reducing the friction of communication, that they want to use these applications. So the reality is the NHS isn't dealing with this issue of control and processing very well. And if a patient came to any of my organizations out there, whether it's the NHS or elsewhere, and said, can I have my data that's been transacted over WhatsApp? There'll be no place for the hospital to even start because there's no record of it. So there's some standards, but then there's the reality. And the reality is the NHS has not got a grip of the transacting of this data from third-party applications.
Interesting. Franz, I see that you're definitely in agreement.
Absolutely.
Build on that, but I've got to ask you, what the heck is the WhatsApp dilemma? So finish what's saying and please enlighten us, because definitely love that term.
Yeah. I mean, Sam touched upon it already very nicely with that flavor of budget dilemma, I would call it. But what we mean with the WhatsApp dilemma is, I remember 2018, because it's been out there for a longer time. It has nothing to do with COVID. It was there before already, but now it gets more and more visible. So for that, I would even say COVID had a good impact because a lot of hospitals or players in the healthcare sector, when I talked to them 2 or 3 years ago, and I said, see, you have a lot of employees there that need to communicate. It's sometimes life or death decisions, or what you decide is impacting that. And mobile workers all across, and all you give them is email and a decked phone. Is that enough, or don't you think that they probably just use consumer messaging applications like WhatsApp because they just don't have anything else from their employer? And that's the brutal truth. That's also what Sam has just described. So of course, doctors were exchanging with other doctors or with care personnel the patient information. And when that person then leaves the company, this information just goes along with that person, right? Because it's on a private WhatsApp account. There's no control for the hospital to say, oops, this data needs to stay here, or we delete it. No chance. So, but on the other side, interacting with instant messaging and in such a rich manner that you can also, you know, send pictures, you can have a video call when you need it because you have a problem here, being a care nurse or whatever, and a colleague would know what to do in such a situation. You can just do a WhatsApp call and make a video call, yeah, and say, what would you do here? And then you get the information. So in general, this instant messaging, chat messaging, video calling is adding so much value. But due to the fact that the hospitals are not having an own solution that they give to their employees, employees just need to find their own way. And of course, all they have is consumer messaging apps. And that's the dilemma, because, and I'm sure it might have saved lives before. So I'm not saying don't do that at all anymore. What I'm saying is hospitals need to get into the driver's seat, and they need to get the control and need to say, and it doesn't need to be our solution. Of course, I'm sales, but I'm trying to be not sales, not a lot of sales in this panel. But NetSphere, for example, is built exactly for this as a WhatsApp um, uh, alternative, which is built from the ground up with the 4 pillars of security, control for the IT department, compliance, and last but not least, collaboration features, because you have to make it, of course, good for the user. If you have the safest tool on earth, which is not adding any value or has no rich features, then it's not being used. And then you have a double dilemma. You pay for something that is not used and they're using WhatsApp again. So it needs to be attractive for the users as well. And we think we've done a very good job there. We have a lot of hospitals in Germany as customers. And what we've seen is that in the pandemic last year, the WhatsApp dilemma all of a sudden became visible. So they were saying, okay, now we need something. And on top, what they also saw is, and by the way, with today's landscape of people having their WhatsApp accounts, I don't have a central tool where I can get information to all my employees. And in times like COVID, where things change every day, like you need to inform your people about the latest and greatest, especially in hospitals. And that's not just the communication collaboration piece, but also this information piece, being able to broadcast information to teams or to the whole your whole group of employees. Yeah, and that's it in a nutshell.
Thank you, Robin. Build on that if you want. Then I would love it if you could sort of bridge to other solves or solutions Biome is currently innovating around. I'm fascinated by this concept of what exactly is industry's role in solving some of the issues that Franz had just discussed and Sam, and you know, take the floor from there. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So a lot of what Fran said really resonates with me. And the reason is because if we take it at the highest level, or at the most basic level, I believe what Franz is saying, and this is certainly what I believe, is that HCPs and patients, whether it be HCP to HCP communication or HCP to patient communication, it's going to happen anyway, right?
Exactly.
It's going to happen whether they have a purposefully built infrastructure to communicate through that accounts for security, accounts for functionality, or whether they just have a WhatsApp, account that simply only accounts for functionality, may not account for security. It certainly doesn't account for knowledge share, right? And it creates this need, and it's a need that we see as well, where there needs to be this infrastructure put into place that gives the HCP and the patient the opportunity to have that communication. Now, delve a little bit further into the second part of the question that you asked, Bob, beyond just HCP and patient communication, we also see an uptick in the need for HCP to HCP communication, but with an interesting twist. The pandemic has created a situation where now individuals have been forced to overcome this either technological or emotional barrier of entry to start utilizing these solutions, right? And so as a result of that, we need to be willing to take advantage of that and say, okay, well, now they're willing to use it. And because they're willing to use it, we now need to be able to create these networks, especially among HCPs, that is able to have this knowledge share where we no longer have HCPs, for example, with really niche expertise that sits in one part of the country or one part of the world, and patients have to travel all the way there in order to communicate with them. Or more importantly, having HCPs that have a niche expertise in one part of the country or one part of the world, and not having that shared with other HCPs that have access to patients that have these rare diseases, rare conditions that they have an expertise in. So the development of these networks among HCPs is one of the critical pieces, in addition to the HCP to patient communication issue that I described earlier, that I believe we certainly need to help to solve. But Franz's characterization of that, I think, is perfect, and it's the first time I hear the WhatsApp dilemma. I think it's a wonderful way to put it. But it speaks exactly to that, right? They're going to do it anyway, and we need to help build out this capability so that it can happen in a way that is most beneficial to patients and to healthcare providers. Because at the end of the day, if we're treating our patients, if we're doing everything we can to help treat patients more effectively, to help physicians treat those patients more effectively, well, then we're all going to benefit from it. Yep. All of us in the ecosystem will benefit from it.
Yep. It's interesting because at Havas, a lot of our requests have been around both the training to utilize these platforms by HCPs as well as patients, but also that understanding of the networks, like you said. And I think that what's interesting here and today, but COVID has shown of the urgency from a timeliness perspective. When you add social media into the mix, where a lot of doctors are talking and getting their peer-to-peer communications done, those spheres of influence change sometimes hour by hour during the day, depending on market dynamics, what the need is in my office. And so, yeah, I think that, it's a critical place to focus, and I really like that answer. And Sam, speaking of this need to facilitate the patient's experience while also communicating with physicians, speak, if you will, about the consent process. How on platforms like yours, the Newman platform, and others is consent currently handled? Is it different since the COVID pandemic? And can we still innovate around this idea of consent? I mentioned rolling consent, for instance, or partial consent. Have you seen a change? And is there a promise for more innovation around this?
Well, I think consent has, really changed in the way it's been applied. And if we look back at consent, it started off around access to clinical services. A patient would see me or someone else, and they're consenting for treatment. But now there's more than one type of consent. They're not only consenting to have treatment, they're also giving consent around how their data is stored and shared. And so we have to be able to separate out those two different types of consent. So consent around access to treatment and services, well, that's kind of not really changed that much. In most cases, it's a form of implied consent in the UK, and sometimes it's more explicit, especially for online services. Consent around data sharing, and so the consent relating to someone's privacy, the rights they're giving up. At the moment, it's almost a blanket form of consent. But we have to move to a more sophisticated model where the consent relates to the episode of care, the degree of urgency, the circumstance at that time. And actually, it's not just consent that is blanket and for life, but it's consent in relation to circumstances, accepting that we're in a health ecosystem with a whole range of different providers coming together. And that consent in one part of the system doesn't necessarily mean that that consent spans across the system. That's one side of it. But the other side of consent relates to the clinician, because in the UK, the law has got to the point, because of case law, that actually we need a different level of consent for the clinician when they're also providing treatment. And that form of consent needs to be transparent to the patient. So I actually think there's an innovation opportunity here. There's a whole area of untapped innovation around making consent better for both parties, but also improving the quality of consent. So actually, I don't see consent as a barrier. I actually see it as an opportunity, as a way of transforming the way we reaffirm messages to citizens. And that's great. And it's great to see some of the participants in the biome, and Robin will be familiar with some of these, because some of them are dealing with this problem right now around how do we get consent right for certain groups of patients. I've certainly seen that in the biome in relation to cancer care, for example. So I think there's an opportunity to do it better and solve some of the problems.
Franz, do you agree? Can we still improve that process and at the same time, or because of that, optimize the customer experience that our HCPs and our patients really are used to in other areas in terms of digital transactions?
Yeah, absolutely. Because when you look at it, I said it before, the customer journey is very important, and in this case, patient journey. And along that journey, there's so many different applications and so many different solution providers involved when you look at it from a technology angle. And I think there is so much opportunity there in cooperating in a way that always has this patient first mentality, still protecting the patient data at max. And both is possible. Of course, we always have fields where one is like in the other direction, but when you have solution providers along that patient journey that know that patient data is the highest value that needs to be secured and protected, and still work together in a way that data can be exchanged, that data can be leveraged in a way that it's best for the patient, together with what Sam just said about the consent from the patient, because a lot of times a patient will be okay if that data is used when it adds value to him or her, then being healthy again afterwards. So I think there's a lot of opportunities still out there, and I'm positive. I'm positive in this digital transformation process that we are, that steps will be taken by the players along this patient journey to make it better for the patients, but not insecure or unsecure at the same time.
I think that this theme of kind of hope and a sense that out of the negative impacts of the current sort of waning pandemic, we do owe it in a way to those impacted to push forward and provide hope, but leverage what we've been given to really make an impact on the day-to-day experiences that we provide. And Robin, I know this is going to be Pandora's box, if you will, but try to narrow down out of this post-COVID sort of era, what are the things that most excite you about this opportunity for meaningful improvement in patients' lives?
Interesting question. So I'd say this: the pandemic has been a uniquely awful situation that has occurred to all of us. But it's also proven that there is a completely different way, more efficient way, a more customer-centric way to deliver care, whether that be directly from the HCP to the patient, whether that be a knowledge share between HCPs in developing networks. And I think what's critical for us to do is to not just understand and acknowledge those lessons learned, but to take those lessons learned on board, make them the norm moving forward, so that the advances that we were forced to make as a result of the pandemic are something that we take as a silver lining because of what has happened. I think that is going to be and I hope that that is going to be the takeaway from all of this when we look back 5 to 10 years from now and we think about this in this concept, in this context rather. It's very easy. It would be very easy for us to lose that, right? It would be very easy for us to kind of go back to pre-pandemic ways of working. But I don't think we will. I think I think people have gotten an opportunity, as I said earlier, to overcome that initial emotional barrier of talking to your physician over over your computer or phone, and physicians have gotten over that initial barrier of having that conversation. But more importantly, the technology has advanced in a way where it allows for that to happen in a much more efficacious manner, in that the HCP can now take endpoints that they would have normally never been able to do virtually, with the patient being at home, by leveraging technology that's found on the patient's phone, or providing the patient with very simple hardware that could be shipped to them and then shipped back. I mean, there are all kinds of new technologies that are out there. And one last thing that I'll mention, I've often said this, but it still remains true. The thing that most excites me about the conversations that I have today, whether it be with the business inside of Novartis, whether it be with hospital systems, whether it be with patients or healthcare providers, is that we're talking to them today, not about innovation as a nice thing to do or to have or to future-proof your capabilities, but rather we're talking about innovation as a matter of business continuity. It's what's needed in order to be able to succeed today, not tomorrow. Because when patients are given the option of being able to engage with their physicians effectively virtually, and or engage with their physicians in person, or told you have to go to the physician's office, you have to do things the way it was done before, today they will almost always choose to have the option, right? To have the option to have that virtual capability. That was not the case prior to that pandemic. It just simply wasn't, because patients didn't look at things that way, physicians didn't look at things that way, and that emotional cognitive change is what I'm really excited about, and I think is going to really change or continue to change the way that we work moving forward.
Sam, quickly, your thoughts on what buoys your hope the most out of this learnings from the pandemic?
I mean, I think there's lots that has been that we can take that are positives from the pandemic. The ability for people to adapt and change, the ability for people to suddenly start using technology that didn't even exist, implementation of basic things like remote monitoring and all of those things. But equally, there were decisions that were made that we probably would not have made had it not been for the pandemic. So I think we also need to teach people to have the capability and learn from what also didn't work as well as what did work. And so we can know what we might want to roll back or modify going forwards. So not to accept that all the things we put in place for the pandemic that worked in that crisis are going to work going forwards when we come out of the crisis. So I think we need to also learn what it's like to not be in a crisis such as a pandemic. So yeah, two things there that I think are important: the positives in the pandemic, but also things that we may not want to continue doing.
Love that. So Franz, bring us home with what you see from this topic or others that really gives you hope and meaning going forward.
Yeah. So just in general, I'm lucky and happy to be in a space, secure communication, which is very important. It has been, but it is even more important going forward for all that we've said today in this panel. And coming back to what I said before, this patient journey, being part of solution that improves that patient journey is very exciting. And I see solutions like ours, like communication solutions, secure communication solutions, with secure APIs as kind of the glue between what I said before, different solutions along that way of a patient journey. Because when I look at today and the past, there's a lot of silos in hospitals, especially, but not just there. Let's be honest, it's also out there in other market segments. It's not just healthcare, but all these silos begin to see, oops, this silo thinking and silo acting is no longer working. We have to like cooperate together, and that demands, of course, secure communication and collaboration tools, and that's why I'm super happy to be a puzzle piece in that picture with our solution NetSphere, and I'm looking forward to what is coming.
I would like to reiterate my gratitude for being part of this panel and for the three gentlemen here, Robin, Franz, and Sam. I know your skills go way beyond the specific topic, but I want to thank you for all you're doing because it is not easy to press forward. And I know in your hearts it is so that the day-to-day lives of the people that we care most about, patients and those treaters, improve. So once again, thank you. And thank you to the Founders Forum, as well as everybody who has joined this discussion. I really appreciate it. And have a great day.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.